Okay, so we're going to be wrapping up this bit of the unit where we've been talking about the civil rights movement in this video. We'll talk more about different things that happen later on, but we'll be sort of wrapping up what happens here in this part of the movement in the 60s and 70s. So we're going to be talking about some people and events and facets of all of this that we haven't quite mentioned yet, including Black Power, Black Panthers, and so we'll be starting with Malcolm X. So you did see Malcolm X in Selma, if you remember, when he went to Selma to talk to Coretta and like show his support for what they were doing there. So he is depicted in that movie. Malcolm X was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and he grew up there. His last name was originally Little, so his name was Malcolm Little, and he dropped that name later on in his life because he said that it was a slave name, because it wasn't uncommon for slaves to take the last name of their original owners. So there are plenty of Black people today who can trace their ancestry back to slaves. That a lot of times their last name came from a slave owner. So he said that he was going to drop that, and he just took on the letter X. So Malcolm had a really troubled childhood. He grew up very poor, involved in a lot of crime, and by the time he was 21, he had landed himself in prison. When he was in prison, he started to get involved with some new people and some new organizations, including deciding to convert to Islam. So there are multiple, just like, there are different denominations of Christianity, there are different denominations of Islam as well. And the regular, I guess it's like weird to say regular, but I guess you'd say like the most common denomination would be Sunni Islam, Sunni. That is not what Malcolm X converts to. He converts to the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam is a small sect that is just Black Muslims, and their main focus is on not necessarily Black power, more Black nationalism. So their philosophy is that Black people are the superior race and that all white people are the devil. All white people. So he got very, very involved with the nation, and when he got out of prison, he became one of the nation's most prominent ministers, and was speaking all over the country, and sort of I guess you could say became the face of the nation for quite some time in the early to mid 60s. Eventually, he started speaking. He started speaking about, obviously he was always talking about race relations. That's a big, huge piece of what the nation is involved in. But he started using the phrase "by any means necessary," and that sort of became his signature line. You heard one of the SCLC members mention that in the movie Selma, if you were paying close attention. He says, we don't need him coming here with his by any means necessary stuff. And what by any means necessary means is that Black people in America should obtain equality by any means necessary. And if that means violence, then that means violence. So it wasn't necessarily that he was saying violence is the solution. He's just saying that if violence is going to be a solution, then we don't need to shy away from using it. So he's definitely representing the more militant side of the movement. He's very critical of Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC. They did not get along by any means. But eventually, Malcolm X reached the point where he felt he had grown as much as he could within the nation. And so he decided to leave the nation. And he ended up traveling to Mecca, spent a few months in the Middle East, did some soul searching, returned to the United States. Really a different person. And that's when he goes to Selma and tries to, mend that bridge between himself and Martin Luther King Jr. When he came back, he had formed a new organization called the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And that was still a more radical side of the movement, but less violent and militant, I think, than he had been when he was still involved with the nation. Now, the leader of the nation at the time was a man named Louis Farrakhan, who's still alive today, but he's no longer the leader of the nation. He's still a part of the nation, has a big influence in it, but he's not the leader anymore. So Farrakhan actually put a hit out on Malcolm X when he left the nation. He considered it that he was basically a traitor, and the punishment, for treason is death. So he put a bounty on Malcolm X's head, and that was one of the reasons that Malcolm left. As soon as he left the nation, he left the country to sort of like wait and see if things died down. When he came back, he thought things had died down, but they really hadn't. And he was giving a speech in front of the Organization for Afro-American Unity at a rally, and right after he got off stage, 3 members of the nation shot and killed him. And so that was a huge blow to that side of the movement, but it's still going to continue and keep rolling on, and we're going to see the people who have been drawn to that side are going to be now swept up in other things when violence takes a big piece of that. It sort of makes people think that now violence is the solution and that he was right. So Black Power is definitely a huge side of that more militant aspect. So the phrase Black Power was originally coined by this guy you see on the top, Stokely Carmichael. Now, Black Power does not mean black violence at all, and I don't want you to think that. That's not at all what it means. What Black Power means, and what Stokely Carmichael said, was that when Black people talk about getting equality, it implies that white people are inherently superior to black people, and that black people are striving to become equal to white people. But that's not the case. They are equal. They are just striving to be seen that way. So he says, Black Power is more about empowering the black community instead of making it seem like they need to make themselves equal to white people. So Black Power really caught on quickly. There are a lot of leaders who got involved with the Black Power movement who had been involved in other organizations previously. This is more of an idea than an organization. Like Stokely Carmichael was involved in SNCC. James Meredith, if you remember, who graduated from Ole Miss and got his law degree from Columbia. He was a lawyer for the NAACP. He got very involved in the Black Power movement as well. He staged something called the March Against Fear, which is supposed to be a voter registration march, to encourage people to be registered to vote in the state of Mississippi, and it was a Black Power thing. And about 20 miles into that march, he was shot and died shortly after in the hospital. You see here on the more left picture is Tommy Smith, who is an Olympian, and he has his fist raised in Black Power. The Olympics have very strict rules about making political statements, for athletes making political statements during the games, and both of these guys actually had their medals taken from them immediately, and they were removed from the games and sent home. But they knew that would happen, and they felt that the message was stronger than that anyway. Now, the reason why Black Power a lot of times was getting associated with black violence is because around the time that Black Power really started to catch on and gain a lot of attention was the same time that we were starting to see a lot of race riots breaking out in the late 60s. So a lot of people, it's easy for the press and the mass media to make it seem like this is all one thing, but it really wasn't. It was just very much bad timing. So a very similar situation happens here to the Black Panthers. So the Black Panther Party was founded and born out of Oakland in California by these two guys on the right, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And Oakland, if you know anything about Oakland now, the Bloods and the Crips were born from Oakland. There's always been a very high tension between police and the black community, and between white people and black people in Oakland. There's been very high racial tensions in that area of California for a very long time. And there was, many cases back in the 60s where black people would call the police or call for an ambulance or something if they needed help, and they wouldn't come, or it would come way, way later because they were just not cared about at all by those rescue workers. So the Black Panther Party actually originally started to become sort of like the police force and rescue unit for the black community in Oakland. They would run ambulances and things like that for people. You could call the Black Panthers instead of calling 911, and they would probably get to you faster and be more helpful. They did, like breakfasts for poor children who during the summertime, like a lot of kids get their breakfast at school if their family is of a lower income, but during the summer that's a missed meal, and because they're not getting that anymore because school is out, so the Black Panthers would host early morning breakfasts for a lot of kids in the summertime. They did a lot of stuff that was really important for their community, but they gained national attention when they staged a protest against a gun control bill in Sacramento being the capital of California. California had a gun control bill up for a vote, and the Black Panthers have always been and were at the time very pro Second Amendment. So you see these photographs. They went to Sacramento and walked around the Capitol with these, ammunition belts and shotguns draped all over their black with their signature black leather jacket and black beret. And that's a very striking image, and that gained national attention. And that's when they really become to represent the more younger and more militant side of the movement through the later 60s and into the 70s. Eventually, they do get a really horrible reputation for violence because several of their members had been involved in violence against police officers and against other people in the community. And at the same time that we're seeing the Black Panthers rise, we're seeing more of those racial riots and tensions rise. So a lot of it, again, is bad timing and a few quote-unquote bad apples spoiling the whole bunch, so to speak. So eventually, once we get to the late 70s, they do sort of fizzle out. Not that they completely go away, but they definitely are not as significant by the time we get to the late 70s. So we really could mark the end of that more peaceful side of the movement in 1968. In 1968 is when we start to see a lot more race riots, and the Black Panthers are catching on, and we really see a different type of movement happening in the 70s and on through the rest of the 20th century, because we see that change here with the death of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. So in March of 1968, MLK had gone to Memphis, to Tennessee, to help support a strike of black sanitation workers in Memphis. They were on strike because they were being paid less than the white employees. And so the SCLC had gone. You see Ralph Abernathy standing here, and here's Jesse Jackson. And they had gone there to, he was supposed to be giving speeches to the sanitation workers and working with the people who were organizing the movement. On the night of April 4th at 6:01 p.m., Martin Luther King Jr. stepped out of his motel room at the Lorraine Motel, where he always stayed when he went to Memphis, and he always stayed in room 306. They called it the King Abernathy Suite, and he stepped outside at 6:01 p.m. and was shot through the right cheek. It went down his spinal cord, ricocheted off of his spine, and lodged in his left shoulder. He was immediately rushed to the hospital, but died in emergency surgery at 7:05 p.m. So you see this photograph was taken right after. He's here down on the ground, and you see these guys are all pointing up. So they, figured out that he had been shot from a sniper, and they went up there, found some evidence, which eventually 2 months led them to this man on my right, James Earl Ray. So I'll talk about him in a second, but first you should know that immediately after word of King's death spread, race riots broke out all over the country. LBJ had to declare the next day a national day of mourning. 1968 is a very violent year. This is the same year that we see Bobby Kennedy killed. It's the same year that we see some really horrible events take place in Vietnam, and the Vietnam War escalate to a whole other level. It's just a very, very, very difficult year. And so this sort of kicks all that off. So James Earl Ray was actually found outside of the United States, arrested, and extradited back to the U.S., where he cut a deal, pled guilty in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table, and he was sentenced to serve 99 years in prison, but he did die at the age of 70 in 1998 in prison.